Okay, welcome everybody to a special edition of Conduct Detrimental on Thursday, July 28th. Joining us today for, an emergency podcast is the intrepid breaking news reporter for Front Office Sports. He and I go way back to USA Today, and our guest today is AJ Perez, who's been just breaking stories for about as long as I've been around the sports legal side of the industry, from USA Today to Front Office. He just crushes it and now owns the Israel sports law space. So welcome to Conduct Detrimental again for your fourth or third appearance, AJ Perez.
Thanks for having me.
All right, just before we get into the details of Dan Snyder's testimony, how is it, and we've talked a little bit about this off mic, but you seem to have a knack for breaking stories in a competitive landscape where other people who have great sources are following the same story. How is it that you're getting the inside track all the way from Israel? Are you a member? Do you have roots going back to Israel? Do you have any sources in Tel Aviv?
No, not that I know of. But it's very, very possible. I am half Mexican, half German, so both. But no, it's just I
don't think the German part would work out too well.
No,
but no.
No. So no, not at all. But it's basically I've been doing this for so long, and I've been doing this role for about 15 years. So it's knowing people and not burning people. So if you have a reputation of not burning people and talking to people and being fair, and I think that's the big part of it. And this is what I do. I mean, I was a park ranger. I went to the Reserve Academy. I've been through. So my minor in college was criminal justice. So it was doing these kind of stories is kind of my niche, and it's kind of because I'm not afraid of going to court. I'm not afraid of looking for records. So and now Congress. So.
Yeah, I mean, you and I partnered up once on a public records request in the city of Aventura, going back. Was that the Ezekiel Elliott days?
Yeah, that was like literally the tip was it was a police agency in South Florida. I'm like, oh, that's it.
That
okay,
narrows it down.
Then I'm like, after like an hour or two, and I was like, okay, he was there training. Which gym was he at? Oh, the Aventura. Okay, he must be living close to there, and that's how that one happened. And then you fortunately were able to pick up that CD-ROM for us.
Yeah, my pleasure. And, it's the gift that keeps on giving. That was one of the great sports law stories of 2017. Well, I'm grateful that you're able to hold on to your contacts and sources as you move from USA Today to Front Office Sports. It didn't have to leave it behind as intellectual property like David Letterman had to leave behind stupid pet tricks.
Yeah. Never, ever rely on your corporate email ever. Or corporate. I mean, I've had people who left jobs who lost everything because they had their contacts tied to work, and you can't do that. I mean, I have backups of backups. I have contacts I don't even know. People. I have contacts with people I don't even remember, and then they're texting me. I'm like, oh, now I know them. So,
why didn't we talk about this years ago? When I left my law firm in 2018, I had my entire contact list at Becker and Polyakov just wiped clean. Some accident, but I basically had to start over from scratch.
Yeah, there's some emails I may have lost, but emails aren't that big of a deal anymore. No one even answers them. So.
All right. So thank God you kept your sources. Tell us what happened today in some location in Israel where Dan Snyder finally sat for a deposition in front of staff members of the House Oversight Committee, a deposition that supposedly lasted 11 hours. You wrote about it tonight for Front Office Sports. What can you tell us about some of the details? Take us inside the room.
Oh, it started last night. We didn't know this was going to go down. And my sources were telling me last night, it's like, we still don't know. Get up early. I'm like, I don't get up early. I'll get up early-ish. So by the time I got up, it was going forward, and I got up by the time it started, not knowing, obviously this is all closed door. It's not a hearing, it's deposition. So that means it's in private. The only people who know are going to be Dan's lawyer, or maybe multiple lawyers, Dan Snyder. But this one was different because normally these depositions are just done by staff. But this time, the Congress members, the members of the committee could hop, they're doing a lot of other things. There was a hearing today, many hearings today on Capitol Hill. So people are going to be bouncing in and out. And so that opens the door of more people knowing what's going on. And that's what helped because the members were allowed could ask questions. That was in the statement this morning that came out that said they were going forward minus the subpoena but with, with these basically guardrails where he's not allowed to, or he could dodge questions and he could not answer things, but then he's sort of, he has to come back to the United States at some point. He would finally be served. And I know the clock's running. If the House turns red, this investigation's over, but there's still time. There's the NFL season starts in a few weeks, or about a month and a few, about 5 weeks. But so it's like, there's always a threat of subpoena. And I think that's how there was some horse trading going on today. I think Dan's side, I have no corroboration of this. I'm just reading the tea leaves. Dan's side, I'm pretty sure would have loved the transcript not being released. And I think I don't think that's happened. I think there's going to be a release at some point, but I also think the Oversight Committee kind of took a step back and allowed him to testify without a subpoena.
Well, they had no choice. I mean, he's in Israel, for God's sakes. Beyond the subpoena power of the United States, the House Oversight Committee is on recess beginning July 29th, and then the Democrats could lose control of Congress after Election Day. So it was either accept his terms of voluntary testimony, or good luck trying to serve a subpoena on him on the high seas in Morocco. So I think he won that battle of the wills. But I want to get back to an interesting point you made about the participation by some committee members. As I understood it, this deposition was conducted not, on Zoom in front of a public audience, but was conducted by staff members, presumably an attorney, the staff attorney for the House Oversight Committee. Were committee members, meaning elected officials, permitted to ask questions? Did they ask questions? And if so, which ones? I know multiple ones popped in and out. Now that whether they asked questions, I have not had a corroboration of that. I'm still working on that end. They asked a lot of questions, especially the Democrats, and you also have to remember the GOP minority has just kind of like in a situation where there was Goodell's hearing, they're allowed to ask questions too. So, and that includes their staff, and that includes it goes beyond the Oversight Committee staff. There's two sides. The bigger side is the Democratic side, because they have the majority in Congress, or in the House, or I guess in the Senate too. I guess it's tied. But they're they have a little more authority on these things. But both sides could ask questions, and both the representatives from either party could have come in today and observed or asked questions. So instead of 11 hours of testimony, we could have had 8 hours, 9 hours of political grandstanding about the opioids crisis. What about this? What about that? It could have been a replay of so much would transpire during the Roger Goodell public testimony.
Right. I mean, even with all of that, it only lasted 2.5 hours, less than 2.5 hours. I mean, this lasted 10.5 to 11 hours. Oh, no, Goodell's testimony. That only lasted 2.5 hours. So I was like, I didn't tweet this out, but I was thinking, I'm like, maybe 4 hours, 4 or 5 hours. I did not expect this. And I was like bugging. I think people are tired of me by the end of the day. I'm like, all my sources like, is it still going? I'm like, yeah, it's still going, AJ. I'm like, all right, I got to check.
I think it's one of those. Yeah, I think it's one of those rare situations, AJ, where we're glad it wasn't broadcast on YouTube, because it would have been just a grind to be there, for 11 hours.
I would have loved to watch it. I don't know. I hate waiting and hoping they'll release it. So.
We were going to do a conduct cast for Conduct Detrimental. That would have been like the Jerry Lewis telethon on Labor Day. At some point, we would have been soliciting donations, to fund my future trips.
And we also don't know how many breaks. And one of my sources of my story said, the lawyers didn't stop. His lawyer didn't stop at prevent any questions from being asked. That doesn't mean they did, that there wasn't some kind of back and forth between the lawyers for the committee and Dan's lawyer. But that's so, and they came out with a statement before about the same time I had realized it had concluded. The statement was out. I mean, I couldn't even tweet out that it was over. It was already. I got the statement almost immediately after that.
Yeah, go ahead.
They were prepared. They try to get ahead of this. I think with their statement, even though part of it was wrong. And Florio gave me some pushback on using the statement at all, but I'm like, I'm going to use that's all I got right now. But I took the top part off because it was wrong. Because I knew it was wrong.
He didn't push back against you. He pushed back on the spokesperson.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know. But it's kind of like he didn't push back against me, but it kind of did push back on the whole you know, if one sentence in a statement is wrong, the first or second sentence, does it make the entire thing, you know, BS? I don't know, but that's all we had at the point. But I didn't use that. I mean, I did tweet it out, and when they said the investigation concluded, I'm like, how can the investigation conclude? Well, today you're deposing the main person, the focus of the investigation. It cannot be over last month. It's impossible. You cannot end the investigation last month.
So what was this then?
We're still today. It's like, what, did it not happen?
Was this the Kiner's Corner or the post-game show? It just doesn't matter. Let me read the statement. Let me read the statement that you included in your front office sports article. The statement that probably was written, edited, reviewed before the testimony had even ended. Quote unquote, Mr. Snyder fully addressed all questions about workplace misconduct, described the commander's dramatic 2-year transformation, and expressed hope for the organization's bright future, a commander's spokesperson said in a statement to Front Office Sports after concluding the memorial services for Mr. Snyder's mother. I mean, God, Mr. and Mrs. Snyder look forward to returning their focus to supporting the efforts of the commander's incredible employees and executive team and delivering a winning season for the Commanders fans. Obviously, the word another doesn't belong in there. I added that for humorous effect. So you have that statement juxtaposed against your headline, which describes an intense deposition. Can you elaborate on that and the disconnect between those two statements?
Probably 30 minutes after I updated the story with that statement. I updated it again. One of my sources told me, it was like, I was told it, you know, certain parts got intense, you know, and I think that, I mean, that's natural. When it goes, so anything goes 11 hours, you go right in a car with hours, but if you're with a car in somebody, if somebody, even you like for 11 hours, it's gonna be some intense battles, I think. So when you're the focus of investigation that's been going on since last October, and these are the staff members who have been doing the investigation, not Congress people who can float in. Some have paid attention to this case a lot. There's so much going on in Congress. A lot, maybe some haven't, but there was, you could tell during the hearing who was asking, who was paying attention, who had the best questions, and over 11 hours. I mean, you could, if you knew this was going on, you know, that hearing was two and a half hours long. That's not much of a time window to drop into a hearing. But if you care about this, you could drop in and watch. You could drop in and ask questions if you're a member of Congress, if you're a member of Congress on this committee. And I think that's where the contentious part. I missed no inside information, but could that have been the contentious part? Could have been that what that statement did not address was any financial stuff that I reported on, and that was sent to the FTC. That wasn't part of it, that statement. So, you know, that doesn't mean anything. They just don't want to, maybe that they didn't think that was, since the investigation is supposed to be on toxic workplace, maybe that's why they didn't mention it. But we know it went beyond that. So, and I don't know how many questions were, you know, Goodell wasn't asked about that much at all. I don't think at all during the hearing last month. So maybe they moved beyond that, and the FTC is handling that part of it now. They're done with it. But you know, there were certain things that, you know, that came out in that hearing and prior, in my reporting and reporting by others. There was a lot to cover.
I can't imagine any deposition 11 hours. I mean, I've been involved in over 100 depositions as a litigation attorney in my career, and not once has an 11 or an 8-hour deposition gone through without any fights between the attorneys on and off the record, objections, based on attorney-client privilege. So much has been made about this joint defense privilege that Dan Snyder and the NFL share with respect to the Beth Wilkinson investigation. And then there's the issue of attorney-client privilege, non-disclosure agreements. Did Snyder or his attorney invoke any of these privileges or refuse to offer full testimony based upon any assertion of a privilege or protection under an NDA? Was that raised at all during the hearing?
I have no idea yet about that. There are certain things I hopefully I'll get to tomorrow. But that, as far as invoking the Fifth or anything else, privilege or NDAs, that was big in the statement that came out this morning. One of the big reasons they wanted him under subpoena was because we saw that with the other depositions that a lot of people who wanted to voluntarily come in were hesitant because they didn't think they could talk about everything. So they wanted to come in under subpoena. So that's one of the reasons, because it basically dissolves the NDA issue. And that's why they wanted him, and that's what they wanted him to be deposed under subpoena. That was that's the main reason, that they were afraid. There's no, whether that happened or not. That's still, there's so many things that we don't know at this point outside of what I reported, which is not a whole lot yet, but it's more than a lot, more than most others, everybody, I guess.
Okay, well, based on what your sources are telling you, is the House Oversight Committee finished with Dan Snyder?
No, I mean, there's 10 and a half to 11 hours of testimony to go through. You can't be finished. You got to start vetting what he said, compare it to what others said. You have to start looking, whether, this was under oath. He didn't have to be under oath. He's talking to Congress saying statutes apply. You can't lie. And if they're, that's the danger. That's the danger of testifying that long. There's a chance that anybody could misstate something. If you're on there for 11 hours, the chances of misstating something where they have to go back to him. And that's not saying that Mr. Snyder lied or anything, but they're going to have to vet stuff, and they're going to have to see what he testified to today matches what they had. And there's beyond testimony of others. There's records, there's other things that this committee's, hundreds of thousands of pages from the NFL. I know they didn't get the emails or anything else about the emails, but there's a lot of other stuff that the NFL turned over that we saw used during the hearing, and a lot of stuff that they hadn't published publicly.
Yeah, well, Snyder was quick to offer, or his publicists were very quick to provide you with a written statement almost immediately after the hearing. What feedback, if any, have you gotten from the House Oversight side or from people who are plugged in to the House Oversight Committee? Were they satisfied with what they heard today, and what's their takeaway?
The sense was they're exhausted. I mean, they were up early because not knowing if this was going to go down today. I got, outside of some people in Congress that I've talked to, and I've now some of my sources I was texting throughout the day. But it was, they weren't the ones, they weren't part of the staff. The staff didn't talk today, as far as, not to me at least, as far as how things went inside there. I'm guessing they're wait till tomorrow. And I think if Snyder gave a lot of pushback, there's almost a guarantee that this deposition is going to come out. I mean, especially if he's misstating stuff in statements right after the thing's over. I mean, there's no love lost between some of these members of Congress and that includes some of the local politicians. Raskin in Maryland, not too far, from FedEx Field. You got Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton in DC, delegate, but also she's a member of this committee. And these are pretty locally and even national. These are pretty powerful people, and they care about this subject. And there's and there are others as well. So it's gonna be it's not over, but like you mentioned earlier, the clock is ticking. What can be done before election day? While these while campaigning starting and everything else, but while the campaign they're gonna start campaigning for their to keep their jobs, or maybe run for Senate for some of them. The staff's gonna keep working. They do take vacations, but they're not, they're not campaigning. That's not what they're barred from that. Their job is to investigate.
Yeah. Did Snyder and his legal team extract any promises from the House Oversight Committee on the release of the transcript, whether it's subject to an agreement between them as to what gets released and the timing of the release of the transcript? Anything you can tell us?
In the statement this morning, it's basically said that they have the right to release it as they had before. Like they did with the other. There was like 3 different depositions that were part of that were posted on June 22nd, the day of the hearing. So there and there were others. There were a lot of depositions that were not posted as well. That that they could make public, especially if something that Snyder said today conflicts with somebody else. That could be release of more transcripts beyond today. So I think I think the fact that they let him testify voluntarily, I don't think I think that's where the kind of, they kind of put their foot down as far as any other concessions.
Okay, now let's discuss the fate of the Lady S. Sailing the high seas. Dan Snyder is in Israel, and I think we understood that was his attorney physically located in Israel, or did she participate in the deposition remotely via
I don't
Zoom?
know. I think it was remotely via Zoom, unless she was in the chamber. I'm not sure.
I remember from Dan Snyder's Yacht Tracker Twitter handle that a second Dan Snyder owned jet landed in Israel a couple of days ago. So that might have been the
Could have been
transport of the
that would
attorney.
make sense. I mean, you're an attorney. Imagine trying to counsel your client in this big of a spotlight while you're on Zoom. No, Dad, don't answer that. I mean, how would that even work? So that would probably.
Well,
be a
that's
good
why
assumption.
she turned down. His attorney turned down the opportunity back in June for Snyder to testify remotely because it wouldn't work without her in the room. So I would presume that she was on that jet in person in Israel. Man, those are the best billable hours. When you're on an airplane, you're flying, I don't know, 14 hours to Israel, 14 times, 15, whatever she charges per hour. That's premium billing for just riding on an airplane in first class.
Well, he did have to get the note from his rabbi to do it. So,
okay, so let's talk about the fate of the Lady S. If, for example, the House Oversight Committee is left nonplussed by Dan Snyder's testimony and wishes to call him back in, they retain the power to subpoena him.
Yes. So and they threatened that today. So
they did. Can you tell us? Well, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So it was they basically threatened it in the press release in the morning. We're saying before this all started, before the hearing started, they basically said if Snyder doesn't truthfully testify, the threat of the subpoena is out there, and they're going to do it, and they're going to wait for him to get back to the United States. He has to come back. The NFL season starts up. And plus they need more people over at the Commanders Park, because obviously from today's photos, no one was out there as far as fans go.
Yeah, but given that express threat and the ongoing risk that the House Oversight Committee is going to invoke that threat and try to serve him with a subpoena, do you think that Snyder remains in Israel for the foreseeable future? I mean, at some point he's got to come back.
He's got to come back. It just looks so bad. I'm not saying that Goodell or anybody else is pressuring him to come back. It's probably not the case, but you just, it's your team's here, even though you're not supposed to be running the team day to day, because it's Tanya's and his wife. You're still, you're the owner. I know they try to call him the co-owner in the statement. I mean, you can't be a co-owner when you own 90% plus of the team. You're the majority owner, and you're the principal owner, and there's no sanction from the NFL where that bars you from running the team. So he cannot. He just can't. This looks so bad. I know,
but he's already been doing it, AJ. He's been overseas on his yacht since the middle of June. You don't think that there's already been an attempt?
I mean, I'd be on a yacht if I had a $500-600 million yacht.
All right,
I'd be out there too.
Yeah, the moment he comes back, though, he's going to get served with a subpoena. So if it comes out that there's some disagreement over whether he fully complied and fully answered the questions, it raises the specter that is he going to remain?
What happens if the House stays blue in November? What's he going to do then?
Yeah, but even if it doesn't, it leaves open all of September, October, November, December until they can call.
They can call, even though in recess, they can call a hearing. I mean, they can call a special hearing. I mean, there are Pelosi may have to sign off on some of this stuff, but there's ways to there's ways around the recess, and I think. And serving him, it doesn't take Congress have to be into that. They can serve him anytime they want. They just can't find him to serve him, and his lawyer won't accept it. So so I think this is good. I don't think he cannot hide out for forever, and that's why I think there was a lot of pressure for him today to testify, to the best as he could, as telling 100% truth, because there's really dodging it now. You could pull the Band-Aid off and do 11-hour here, or the 11-hour deposition today, or face more headlines. We're going to subpoena him. We're going to figure a way to work through the government or where he is, and to serve him. I mean, it becomes a bigger headache. So it was probably in his best interest today to tell the truth, sit down for 10 plus hour, 11 hour, almost 11 hours to, answer the questions. I know it got heated at certain points, as I reported, but it's best to get it over with, because it's going to, this is not going to, they're not going to go, it's not going to go away until election day if the GOP wins the House.
Okay. Did the issue of Tiffany Johnston come up during the deposition? I mean, that's the subject of a pending investigation by Mary Jo White.
I don't know, but I don't know for certain, but it had to, because they said we learned about that at the first roundtable hearing back in February. So that was the latest allegation, the third one connected to Dan Snyder directly. So I think it had to be. If it wasn't asked in nearly 11 hours of questioning, that would be shocking to me. Now, there's certain things I don't know. Like I said, like I mentioned, the financial stuff, holding back revenue, other stuff that was out there, keeping some sweet holder money too long, a lot of stuff that I don't know if he was asked about the financial stuff, but I know they were very concerned with the toxic workplace and the allegations against him.
Okay, so where we are today, the deposition finished 11 hours. How soon before we see the transcript, and what are the next steps?
I hope to learn that tomorrow. But yeah, the next, I think it's going to be released it may take.
It's got to be transcribed. It's got to be transcribed. It's going to be a couple hundred pages.
I hope they had more than one court reporter, because that would be an awful job to sit there for 10 plus hours. I know there were breaks, but that's a long time. And yeah, you have to edit that. And it's just because a stenographer was there taking it all in, it doesn't need to be edited. That takes a while. I mean, that's a lot. I could not imagine. Doing a 20-minute interview, transcribing that myself takes me an hour. So, but they're a lot faster. They're professionals. I'm sure it'll be ready as soon as tomorrow or Monday. But whether it's going to be released immediately, I have no idea.
Okay, let's hope it comes out on a day other than the Deshaun Watson decision from Judge Sue Robinson.
That's going to be tomorrow. That'll be tomorrow at 5:30.
Well, I'm appearing on a Cleveland Browns podcast live at 4:10 p.m. So I've put it out.
It'll be a little after that.
Okay, thank you for the bad news. Nothing worse.
I have no idea. No idea when it's going to be happening. I just, I figured with camp opening on Saturday, I just kind of figured Friday would make sense.
Okay, final question. It seemed very unseemly to me that that we have an NFL owner who's evading service of a subpoena. Let's face it. He's on his yacht for more than the past month. At some point, does the NFL weigh in here and apply any behind-the-scenes pressure to convince him to testify voluntarily? So the question I have is, have you heard anything about the NFL's feeling about Snyder's gamesmanship of sailing the high seas and avoiding service of this subpoena? Was any behind the scenes pressure applied?
I asked that a few days ago, and no comment. But because it's like, isn't it conduct detrimental to dodge a subpoena?
I wrote that. First of all, that's the name of the podcast. But if you're going to really apply your personal conduct policy to the letter of the law, is it not conduct detrimental to the integrity of the National Football League for a team owner?
I asked that exact question. They didn't want to answer it, but I did ask. So, but yeah, it's kind of, it's not, and obviously players being differently was a big issue with the Deshaun Watson case and the hearing. And I think that's and we may see that whenever the punishment gets announced.
Well, you're assuming it's a punishment. We don't know.
Oh yeah. We don't know the findings. I should say it could be a fine or something. Who knows?
Listen,
it doesn't mean games played. So
yeah, that issue of whether there's a disparate discipline system where the owners are treated one way and players are treated different.
I covered that Robert Kraft situation. I covered all that. I'll cover the hell out of that thing. And nothing happened. Well, Jim Irsay is the only owner that since I've been doing this that got suspended. In the NFL.
And that overlooks like Robert Kraft, Dan Snyder, Jerry Jones. He was sued by an exotic dancer in 2014.
Jerry Jones been sued. That was my favorite Jerry Jones. I actually asked him, I was like, after the latest lawsuit or the second to last lawsuit, I asked Jerry, I was like, so, what's going on here? And he was like, what does he say? It was like, comes with the territory.
I don't know. I don't know if that comes with the territory with everybody. I mean, that's a pretty serious allegation that he committed that alleged conduct and paid the woman for
Yeah,
4
it must have
years.
been
Not
it must have been the
so,
previous lawsuit.
no investigation, no suspension.
No.
Jimmy
Oh yeah,
Haslam.
yeah. Even I mean, even the allegations against Mark Davis. They're not as voluminous or as serious as Snyder, but I don't think the NFL, as far as we know, the NFL hasn't launched or hasn't hired an outside investigator for that one. And there's a lot of stuff going on. So
yeah, well, that argument of disparate discipline, if it's going to be heard and credited by anyone in the process, it has to work before Sue Robinson, because Roger Goodell can't address it, wouldn't address it anyway, and he's limited to only modifying the discipline. A federal court, after a lawsuit is filed, is not going to look at the evidence all over again, but would only consider whether there was any actions by Roger Goodell outside the scope of his authority as an appellate judge. So if this issue of selective enforcement is going to gain traction and be successful, it can only occur before this federal judge in this round of the review process, because if she doesn't credit it, it's gone goodbye and it can't be raised again.
Yeah, I know. And that's that'll be interesting to see what she says about that. And I think that's a great argument. I think NFLPA has a great point there. You listed all the owners who got in trouble, and nothing got in trouble outside and didn't get disciplined by the NFL.
Well, that language in the personal conduct policy is essentially the NFL hanging itself by its own petard, and they're not just making out-of-court statements or flippant statements on a television interview. It's codified in the personal conduct policy. It wasn't even negotiated with the players. The league included it on its own initiative that owners are held to a higher standard than the players and traditionally receive more severe discipline for violations of the personal conduct policy. And we know they're paying lip service to that in the policy, but by codifying it in the policy, they've created the opening for Watson and the NFL Players Association to credibly argue before Judge Robinson that this is a disparate discipline system, because under the personal conduct policy, it says right there that owners are held to a higher standard, when in reality and in actuality, they're not held to any standard at all. I think that argument is going to gain traction before Judge Robinson. And the question for me is whether that gives Watson a complete out, or whether it's a factor that would justify less severe discipline. Because if you're going to open the door to selective enforcement and exonerate a player because owner A, B, and C didn't get disciplined, then you're essentially perpetuating this argument forever, and that you can't discipline players next time because the owners weren't disciplined in the first instance. I don't know that Judge Robinson would be willing to completely remove any possibility of discipline based on the non-discipline of Snyder, Jones, Kraft, and Haslam. I think the more reasonable approach is to lessen the severity of the discipline. Instead of 1 year versus 0 games for the owners, maybe a suspension in line with 1 game, 2 game, 3 games, or 4 games would be more in order. So I think it impacts the sliding scale of discipline rather than provide a complete defense. Because if you exonerate the player based on the non-discipline of other owners, then when can you ever, if at all, discipline a player?
I think she's going to be looking at the evidence and how true and how I don't want to say trustworthy, that's not the right word, but just looking at, there's so many allegations, and we know they narrowed it down and presented like the best, or I guess the worst of the allegations that were the most credible. But if they're not credible enough, that's going to be that if she doesn't feel that there's a lot of credible stuff there, that obviously with the lack of criminal charges,
I don't envy her, AJ, because imagine trying to adjudicate what's true and what's not true when you don't have the accusers in the hearing testifying and subject to cross-examination, telling their stories, and having Jeffrey Kessler test the veracity of their stories and claims via cross-examination. She's going to have to make assessments based upon the NFL's own transcriptions and summaries of these witness interviews that were never subject to cross. So that's a very
and
unusual position for a judge to
and
be
with
in.
and or she can read the 24, 25 lawsuits that are basically boilerplate. And it's I don't know. I don't want to get started on how this
All right.
case.
Well, that will be another emergency episode, AJ. I think
Yeah.
we scheduled this as an
15
emergency
minutes.
episode on Dan Snyder. So I didn't live up to my bargain. I'm sorry I kept you long, but it was just so good. I had to keep going. So we'll save Deshaun Watson for tomorrow night or whenever their
Sounds good.
decision is released. So thank you for
No,
thank you for
5:15 tomorrow.
Yeah, okay, I'll book it. I'll call my my media appointment off at 4:10 and rebook it to 5:25. So
I have a better chance with that than winning the the big jackpot in the Mega Millions. So.
all right. Well, AJ, thanks for joining me on such short notice. You've been the most prolific guest in the history of Conduct Detrimental. You're like the Chevy Chase, Saturday Night Live of Conduct Detrimental. This is like got to be your fifth.
I hope my career
appearance.
doesn't fade like his. So hopefully my career will keep going up. And Chevy kind of disappeared.
Well, I hope your waistline doesn't turn into his waistline.
Oh God, no. And
yeah,
I've been 70 pounds lighter for at least 10 years now. So I'm gonna keep that up.
All right. Well, anyway, thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll continue to follow your coverage in Front Office Sports. And anyone who wants to keep up with AJ on Twitter, his handle is by AJ Perez, and you can look for him in Front Office Sports, the website, as well as their Twitter account. So you've been doing great work.
Yeah, go to Front Office Sports and subscribe to our newsletters. They're free twice a day and once on Saturday and Sunday. Great reads.
Thanks again, AJ. Have a great evening.
All right, drink my beer.